Chronicles of Narnia, Book 1, The Magician's Nephew. Chapter 1, The Wrong Door. This is a story about something that happened long ago, when your grandfather was a child. It is a very important story because it shows how all the comings and goings between our world and the land of Narnia first began. In those days, Mr. Sherlock Holmes was still living in Baker Street, and the Bastables were still looking for treasure in the Louchams Road. In those days, if you were a boy, you had to wear a stiff Eton collar every day, and schools were usually nastier than now. But meals were nicer, and as for sweets, I won't tell you how cheap and good they were, because it would only make your mouth water in vain. And in those days, there lived in London a girl called Polly Plummer. She lived in one long row of houses which were all joined together. One morning she was out in the back garden when a boy scrambled up from the garden next door and put his face over the wall. Polly was very surprised because up till now there had never been any children in that house, but only Mr. Ketterley and Mrs. Ketterley, a brother and sister, old bachelor and old maid, living together. So she looked up, full of curiosity. The face of the strange boy was very grubby. It could hardly have been grubbier if he had first rubbed his hands in the earth and then had a good cry, then dried his face with his hands. As a matter of fact, this was very nearly what he had done. "Hello," said Polly. "Hello," said the boy. "What's your name?" "Polly," said Polly. "What's yours?" "Diggory," said the boy. "I say, what a funny name," said Polly. "It isn't half so funny as Polly," said Diggory. "Yes, it is," said Polly. "No, it isn't," said Diggory. "At any rate, I do wash my face," said Polly, "which is what you need to do, especially after—" And then she stopped. She'd been going to say, "after you've been blubbering," but she thought that wouldn't be polite.
Yeah.
"All right, I have then," said Diggory in a much louder voice, like a boy who was so miserable that he didn't care who knew he had been crying. "And so would you," he went on, "if you lived all your life in the country and had a pony and a river at the bottom of the garden, and then been brought to live in beastly hole like this." "London isn't a hole," said Polly, indignantly.
Oh, isn't it?
But the boy was
London
too wound
isn't.
up to take any notice of her, and he went on.
London is not a hole.
"And if your father was away in India, and you had to come and live with your aunt and uncle who's mad, who would like that? And if the reason was that they were looking after your mother, and if your mother was ill and was going to die?" Then his face went the wrong sort of shape, as it does if you are trying to keep back your tears. "I didn't know, I'm sorry," said Polly humbly. And then, because she hardly knew what to say, and also to turn Diggory's mind to cheerful subjects, she asked, "Is Mr. Ketterley really mad?" "Well, he's either mad," said Diggory, "or there's some other mystery. He has a study on the top of the floor, and Aunt Letty says I must never go up there." "Well, that looks fishy to begin with. And then there's another thing. Whenever he tries to say anything to me at mealtime, he never even tries to talk to her. She always shuts him up. She always says, 'Don't worry the boy, Andrew,' or 'I'm sure Diggory doesn't want to hear about that,' or else, 'Now, Diggory, wouldn't you like to go out and play in the garden?'" "What sort of things does he try to say?" "I don't know. He never gets very far. But there's more than that. One night, it was last night in fact, as I was going past the foot of the attic stairs on my way to bed, and I don't care much for going past them either, I'm sure I heard a yell. Perhaps he keeps a mad wife shut up there." "I thought that, yes. Or perhaps he's a coiner. Or he might have been a pirate, like the man in the beginning of Treasure Island, and be always hiding from his old shipmates." "How exciting," said Polly. "I never knew your house was so interesting." "You may think it's interesting," said Diggory, "but you wouldn't like it if you had to sleep there. How would you like to lie awake listening for Uncle Andrew's step to come creeping along the passage to your room? And he has such awful eyes." That was how Polly and Diggory got to know one another. And as it was just the beginning of the summer holidays, and neither of them was going to the sea that year, they met nearly every day. Their adventures began chiefly because it was one of the wettest and coldest summers there had been for years that drove them to do indoor things, you might say. Indoor exploration. It is wonderful how much exploring you can do with a stump of a candle in a big house or in a row of houses. Polly had discovered long ago, that if you opened a certain little door in the box room attic of her house, you would find the cistern and dark place behind it, which you could get into by little careful climbing. The dark place was like a long tunnel with brick wall on one side, sloping roof on the other side. In the roof there was little chunks of... I'm reading to you. You need to behave. Light between the slates. There was no floor in this tunnel. You had to step from rafter to rafter, and between them there was only plaster. If you stepped on this, you would find yourself falling through the ceiling of the room below. Polly had used the bit of the tunnel just beside the curtain as a smuggler's cave. She had brought up bits of old... Okay, we're done.